And with me is Kethevan Gorjestani from our foreign desk. Kethevan, look, you heard Hegseth there. Overwhelming military victory for the United States, he says. Is that true?
Well, look, the messaging from the Department of Defense is that of a military victory, an overwhelming victory. It sounded a whole lot like a sort of a mission accomplished type of moment for the United States. And the focus was very much on that military part. There was actually a question from one of the reporters at some point. You talk about military victory, but did you achieve strategic victory? And that the secretary did not really respond to. But when you look at what Pete Hegseth put forward as far as military objectives that in his words and eyes have been achieved, he said that the Navy had been taken out, the Air Force had been taken out, the air defense system had been taken out, the missile program had been decimated. All of those are pretty much true. Maybe there is a question on the extent to which the missile program has been decimated. Yes, it has been crippled, probably, but there are still missiles being launched, still drones being launched. And we saw that just a few hours ago in the Gulf with the likes of Kuwait and the UAE saying that they were receiving incoming barrages of missiles and drones coming from Iran. So the Iranians are not militarily completely destroyed, at least at this moment. The second thing that he said was that Iran had been rendered combat ineffective. If you think back to the past few days, even before the missile launches of this morning, just a few days ago, Iran managed to shoot down an F-15 from the United States. Yes, the recovery was successful, but they still managed to shoot down an F-15. That means that they do still have some capability. Finally, there was something that was not considered a military objective. Some people even wondered whether it was an objective at all to begin with. We have had contradicting comments on the question of regime change. And Pete Hegseth was asked about this new regime, since he and the President of the United States have talked about the fact that there was regime change because they had killed most of the leadership that was in place. Pete Hegseth said there's a new group of people, therefore there is regime change. This, for anyone who follows and looks at the system within Iran, knows is not true. The regime has not changed. The people have changed, but the regime, the system, the Islamic Republic of Iran has not changed. This is a new type of regime. Some say maybe possibly even more hardline than some of the people that were before, but clearly there is no regime change there. So yes, for the United States, there is a sort of military victory for now, and it is a way for the United States to show that our military might has pushed the Iranians to the negotiating table, which is partly what the plan was all along. They probably thought that it would happen much sooner than what we saw with the 40 days.
And Kethevan, when we look at what may come next now, there may be this meeting in Pakistan on Friday. The Americans, though, as far as I'm aware, have not confirmed they're attending. And there seems to be sort of different plans as to what may be ahead. The Americans and the Iranians both releasing either a 10 or a 15-point plan. We're not quite sure. What's your sense as to what we'll see in the coming days?
Well, look, when you read Donald Trump's words about the proposal that he's received from the Iranians, he talks about a basis for negotiation that he has accepted and that he believes that there have been a lot of points of agreements between the Iranians and the United States. But when you look at, for example, some of the proposals, the demands really of the Iranians that have been put out by some of the Iranian embassies around the world, you start looking at this list, and there are several things that have already been contradicted by Donald Trump and also by Pete Hegseth. Take the third point, for example, acceptance of Iran's right to nuclear enrichment. Just less than 30 minutes ago, Pete Hegseth said at the start that Iran would never be allowed to enrich uranium, and that whatever enriched uranium was in Iran, either the United States would go take it or the Iranians would hand it over unilaterally. The Iranians have said, we are ready to dilute it. We're not ready to get rid of it and to give it to someone, let alone give it to the United States. Another thing, withdrawal of U.S. forces from all bases in the region. No one believes that the United States will have agreed to remove all of its military troops from Gulf states and from the Middle East. That is simply a non-starter for the Americans. Compensation for damages suffered by Iran during this war. The Iranians are insisting that the U.S. broke it, the U.S. will pay for it. That also very highly unlikely that the Americans would agree to all of that. And on the question, the second point, the reopening of the Strait of Hormuz. Pete Hegseth was saying during his briefing that the strait is reopened, that it's going to take a little bit of time mechanically, but that it is de facto reopened. The Iranians are saying, A, we are still in control, and B, we will continue. That is what we want. Continue to control passage in the Strait of Hormuz, which was not what was happening before February 28th. The Americans, we don't know if they're going to agree to that, but what the Iranians are saying is that we will de facto now have control over who gets to pass. We don't know how. Will they make people pay to pass, or do they mean militarily, you need to ask us for permission to go through? But clearly, it's not as reopened as Pete Hegseth was putting it forward. And the question of uranium is also something that Pete Hegseth repeated again. He said it was a non-negotiable for Iran not to have access to enriched uranium. So it's hard to see where the points of agreement that Donald Trump was talking about are. If they are, neither side has been making it public. That could very well be because, of course, negotiations that happen behind the scenes are negotiations behind the scenes, and everyone has their sort of messaging, their twists on reality. Iran has its messaging. The Americans have their messaging. The question is, will we get to those possible negotiations on Friday, and will they involve high-ranking officials from both sides, and will they be face-to-face? And then maybe we'll have a little bit more indication as to what will happen next.